Hello, hello, hello.
And welcome to the Hildebrand Law Firm topic for today.
I'm Kirsten Hildebrand.
And I'm Matt Kaplan.
And we are here to talk about our favorite subject here at Hildebrand Law Firm, and that is lawsuits. So, one of the reasons that you may want to consider doing estate planning is because a little known fact is that they can actually prevent or help you from getting into that situation where being sued results in losing a lot more than what you originally thought.
Yeah, and a lot of people, when I ask them, is that a concern of yours? Oh, I'll never get sued. You know what? You know who also thought they would never get sued? The 40 million people last year who got sued.
40 million. Oh my goodness. And I believe that is like literally on an annual basis. So a separate 40 million people every year on average are getting sued. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, on average within the last 5 to 10 years, on average, the U.S. has 40 million lawsuits year over year. And you know what? That's not just lawyers suing people who are represented by other attorneys. Have you ever watched Judge Judy? Those are real cases. That's why they say real cases, all that. Have you ever watched any of those judge shows? Those are all real cases. You don't need a lawyer to sue someone.
Right.
All you need to do is cover the filing fee with the court and show up.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting sued is something that just happens to people.
So that is one of the strengths of our legal system, is that it is accessible to people. And so that's a good thing. We don't want to make it sound like it's not. In fact, we appreciate the fact that there's a small claims court that you can walk in and fill out a form and say, I want some legal assistance with being able to get what's rightfully mine. Or there's also Legal Aid Society, which provides free legal assistance to people who need it. I think it is very important, and it is kind of a foundational element of our society that if people are wronged, they do have the ability to go and get what it is that they feel that they need. Now, the problem is that as much as there might be people who earnestly do need the legal system's protection, there's also people who act as fraudsters, who go around literally trying to create lawsuits or trying to find reasons to sue people. And there's certainly a lot of vulnerable individuals around, especially small business owners. I've heard it said, and I believe it is true, that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you would get embroiled in some kind of a lawsuit as a small business.
Right. And also, depending on the city that you live in, part of my background includes, I used to do a lot of car accidents and slip and falls. I was a personal injury attorney for a couple of years.
Ooh, tell us.
Yeah, so I
your most interesting personal injury story. I'd love to hear this.
Don't make me. Okay, so my best personal injury story I ever had is I had a client one time who was doing something that we all do. Some of us do multiple times a day. She was on the toilet in the bathroom in the home that she was renting. While on the toilet, she was probably doing what we all do. I don't know, playing games on her phone or scrolling through Facebook, whatever. And then all of a sudden, she hears a crack. She looks up. Here comes the entire ceiling.
Oh!
On her head. The ceiling just collapsed on her head. There was debris all over the floor. Thankfully, it wasn't a very heavy part of the ceiling, but really thankfully, because above her was another bathroom.
Oh my!
Thankfully, it wasn't the toilet, it wasn't the tub, it wasn't the sink. No, just some wood, some plywood, all that. But the worst injury that she sustained is, when that stuff cracks, it releases a lot of dust into the air. She got some of that dust in her eye, and she couldn't get it out until she got to the hospital, and they gave her a flush. So she had dust particles from the ceiling in her eye for hours.
Oh,
which just sounds terrible.
That sounds painful. So did you get her a good deal?
I got her the best deal I could. But what's interesting about that is that think of it from the landlord's perspective.
Right.
If you're the landlord, and if I'm the landlord and I get a call, hey, your ceiling collapsed on me. My first thought is, oh my God, are you okay?
Yeah.
My second thought is, did you die? Like, ceiling collapse. You as a landlord, you're probably thinking the absolute worst. But from the landlord's perspective, you're thinking, I hope I have enough insurance to cover this.
And you might not, because how many of you have actually read all of the very, very, very small print on your insurance policies. I'll tell you what, I do not ever want to be an insurance contract attorney because they have so many outs in so many different ways. Like, for example, I'm guessing that if they found him to be negligent in his maintenance and upkeep of the property, which they can say whether it's true or not is beside the point. They can make that allegation and then refuse to provide coverage. So there's so many different ways that your insurance is not the end of the story and should not be the thing that you rely upon. I'm not saying get rid of it, but I am saying make sure that that is not the only stopgap measure that you have if a lawsuit comes your way.
Oh, for sure. And there's a couple battles. Battle number one, is your insurance going to cover it? Battle number two, do you have high enough policy limits? I mean, I'm sure hopefully everyone out there has heard of policy limits. What that says is I've contracted with insurance company A that if I ever get into this situation, you will cover me up to X amounts. Anything over that, I'm kind of on my own. And so, especially where this comes into fruition a lot is in the realm of car accidents. People get in car accidents. It happens every single day. There's a lot of reckless drivers out there, but really, it just happens. You could be the best driver in the world. You could still get in an accident. You could be rear-ended. I've seen it happen to the most lovely people, to people who are not from that area, who are from that area, all walks of life, rich, poor, anyone can get in a car accident. And so you got to make sure that you have adequate policy limits because let's say you get in an accident with someone and you cause significant damages to them. I've had clients that were paralyzed. I've had clients who have passed away because of the accident. If you have a policy limit of $100,000, that's not going to cover a wrongful death claim. That's not going to cover someone who's paralyzed. That's probably not going to cover someone who has a permanent injury. And so if I'm representing that client and you have a $100,000 policy limit and my client's paralyzed, no, they're not going to be okay with $100,000.
They're going for everything.
They're going for everything.
Yeah, yeah. And, it's funny. I think we feel like we can control this. Oh, I'm not planning on having an accident. But that's the fallacy, right? The fallacy is that you can think I'm not going to have an accident and it won't happen. But in fact, the very nature and definition of an accident is that it is unforeseen.
Right, which is why Judge Judy says that's why they don't call them an on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It's called an accident.
Right.
And I ask every client, I used to ask every client before they walked in, now, did you wake up that morning planning on having an accident that day? And they always say no, absolutely not. Because you never know. You never know what's going to happen. And so whether you're the person who gets hit, whether you're the person who hits the other person, whether it's 50-50, your stuff might be up for grabs depending on the amount of damage that is caused. And so you want to make sure that you protect that stuff.
Yes. So the solution, what is the solution to this sort of thing? Because, there's a lot of things, and I'll just start by saying what's not the solution. It is not the solution to have a simple will in place. That will not protect you against anything. It's even not the solution to have, let me just say it this way. It's a partial solution to have the asset inside of a limited liability corporation or some other type of corporation. Because then if, for example, the landlord puts the property inside of a limited liability corporation, then that entity, if it's functioning properly, and I always make sure to educate my clients on this, because if you decide that you're going to just go open up an articles of organization with the Department of Financial Institutions and you think that is going to protect you, you're dead wrong.
Right.
You have to have a well-working and current limited liability company happening that shows that it is separate from your personal assets. I had a client once who they had a small business and there was somebody who had a slip and fall in their business, and because they had bank accounts that were sort of enmeshed between the business and the personal, and there wasn't a strong delineation between the two, that enterprising personal injury lawyer was coming for all of their personal assets. So that scared them into having to settle for a much larger number than they otherwise would have been happy with. But they also didn't want to see everything potentially at risk through a protracted piece of litigation and a trial.
Right, and the idea from the state is that if you want to be treated like a king, you have to act like a king. Just calling yourself king is not going to afford you the protections. You have to act like a king. What? How do you act like a king? You have to have your own documents in place. You cannot commingle your funds. You have to file annually if that's what your state provides for. You have to file a separate tax return if that's what your state provides for. Whatever the statute says, you need to make sure you act in that sense. Because if you don't, they can come after you personally. Now, let's say you got all that in place. Let's say you're still, someone's still concerned about being sued personally. Then what kind of remedy do we have available for estate planning?
Well, and this is really more on the side of protecting your personal assets. So the business can be over there and its liability may be within that business entity. But then over here, we can put up a really nice firewall to protect your personal assets from having business issues addressed. So that would be within the context of specifically an irrevocable trust that has the proper language in it that makes sure that it is a firewall. Just having a trust is not going to do it. You have to make sure that it is the proper type of trust with the proper language that protects those assets. Also, sometimes there is a requirement that you have some sort of that you've passed this information on. So say, for example, let's suppose the business wants to take out a line of credit, and then it would be incumbent upon the individuals to let the bank know that we have a trust in place and it is not subject to claims of any creditors, including that bank, so that then they would be aware of that. Another function that we can perform is putting a marital property agreement into place. So a marital property agreement can be really useful because you can say, let's suppose my husband wants to go nuts and he wants to buy a jumping gym. And I'm like, wow, that seems like a lot of liability. What if the kids knock their heads together and somebody gets hurt? And I'm concerned about these moms getting upset and suing. And what if somebody gets really sick because something hasn't been wiped off properly? So I say, you know what, you go ahead and you do that business, but let's move all of our assets by virtue of a marital property agreement into my name and on my side of the ledger, so that then we break that presumed joint ownership element that is in the Wisconsin statutes. So that's another way that you can modify the positioning and the ownership of the assets in order to protect. And then I go out and I divorce him. No, I'm just kidding. Perfect. I would never do that. Never. But you do have to make sure that I'm too old to divorce at this point. So you have to make sure you're past that point.
Right. And so, yeah, I think long story short, one of my best recommendations, where if, whether you're scared of getting sued or whether you're not, I mean, it happens. And a lot of people come to me usually after the fact. Hey, I got sued and now my house is up for grabs. Hey, I got sued and now my bank account is up for grabs. The state of Wisconsin and a lot of other states, they have a lot of remedies in place for creditors to try to get money off of people. If you owe somebody money, and let's say it's a ton of money and your only asset is your home, you're exempt up to a certain amount. Anything over that, they can do a foreclosure on the home, they can sell it, and they're entitled to that money. If you have over a certain amount in your bank account, they can garnish that bank account. All you do is they send the bank a letter. As long as they have a judgment, send the bank a letter, bank sends them a check for your money. And so people want to make sure that they protect that, because you never know. You never know if you're going to be one of those people in the accident.
Well, and you raise a really important point, and that is, you may be just fine, but your child or your loved one who is set to inherit might be spending a little too much time at the gambling casino, or might be doing a little bit of crazy stuff with, some maybe hang gliding or something like that. Right. So if you want to make sure that your assets are not going to be immediately available to their creditors, you would want to make sure to have, again, specific provisions in a trust that would allow for that kind of asset protection against their creditors. And that's something really important to think about too. Well, we could go on and on, couldn't we? Imagine that. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And we are really interested in protecting your today and tomorrow. So feel free to give us a call if you want to talk about any of these things further. And thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.